Good evening. You're watching The Big Story. I'm Olivia Quay in the Straits Times newsroom.
And I'm Haryanto Diman. Of course, this week is my turn coming to you from my own home. Singapore confirmed a new daily high of 1,426 COVID-19 cases as of noon today. The majority of them continue to be foreign workers living in dormitories. 16 are Singaporeans and permanent residents. Now, the total number of confirmed cases in Singapore now stands at 8,014.
In other news, 2 Singaporeans and a US commercial pilot are expected to be charged tomorrow for breaching stay-home notices after they entered Singapore from overseas. Each is believed to have left his or her place of accommodation during the 14-day stay-home period. Meanwhile, around 180,000 foreign workers in the construction industry and their dependents will be on stay-home notices starting today to May the 4th. The notices apply mostly to work permit and S-Pass holders currently not staying in the dorms. And last Friday, volunteers launched a campaign to encourage Singaporeans to be more welcoming when migrant workers are relocated to housing estates in a bid to curtail the spread of the virus. Called Welcome in My Backyard, or Wimby, the initiative is a direct response to concerns that people will adopt a not in my backyard stance at the prospect of workers turning up in their estates.
We're pleased to welcome Wimby Ambassador Ethel Pang. Now, Ethel, you're one of around 20 volunteers in this initiative. Why do you decide to take part?
Right. So I've actually been volunteering with NTIA for a while already. So this is NMP NTIA Ong. And I've kind of entered the local social impact scene a couple of years back. One of the things that cropped up in one of the WhatsApp messages that I'm in is this initiative that a couple of members in the community were precipitating. And since Red Hill Close is really close by to my place of residence, it's just like 10 minutes walk away. And I frequent the neighborhood really regularly. I thought that is something I could lend my weight behind, especially as a young person interested in boosting the community efforts during this COVID situation and the circuit breaker period, and also as a resident being a point of contact on the ground and kind of being the go-between in the campaign and the residents. Yeah, I thought that it would be a really good way of supporting a local initiative.
That's really admirable, Ethel. So you live in Red Hill. I think you mentioned that it's near to where the campaign will be piloted in Red Hill Close. Now, 21 vacant HDB blocks have been prepared for foreign workers to live. So not only do ambassadors like yourself live in communities that will house these workers, you will also try to debunk stereotypes and reframe narratives about foreign workers, as well as provide feedback on how locals are feeling. So how are you and the rest of the volunteers going about doing this?
Yes, that's right. So I would like to highlight that I'm only the first of hopefully many other ambassadors that will come on board. We're actually actively looking for more people to join our campaign and even expand into other neighborhoods like the Taman Jurong neighborhood if it's possible. And I'm actually in conversations with a couple of friends who have already stepped forward asking how they can help. These are friends who live in like the nearby vicinity. But as ambassadors, we'll have to find creative ways to seek the sentiments on the ground and to reach out to local communities, being mindful of the fact that the circuit breaker period limits the physical kind of movement on the ground. One thing that I'm really proud of is that we are already currently closely working with the grassroots leaders. So this afternoon, actually, I just got off a call with Mr. Fabian Ho, the Red Hill Community Director, and he's working closely with MP Sam, who is the MP of the Red Hill neighborhood. And he's actually really keen on aligning our messaging and efforts because the local grassroots have already started their own initiatives to reach out to migrant workers, and they have been very closely associated with moving the migrant workers into these temporary dorms. So he's already actually expressed a lot of gratitude that we are coming in to help and as volunteers, because currently they are quite overstretched and there's a very small team on the ground doing this. So working with our local grassroots can help disseminate the information and campaign materials at a local level. And they have the connection with residents already who are reaching out to them to voice concerns and to voice safety, I guess, measurements that are already in place. So they are already able to help us reach out to residents who are the ones we are targeting specifically. So these are the ones that are concerned about migrant workers coming in and being like the spreader of like COVID amongst the local community. And this is something that we can work with them to debunk. Yeah, so another thing that we have in mind is we actually are in the midst of organizing our first kind of dialogue session that will be happening this weekend. This dialogue session will bring together residents, migrant worker support groups, and even medical professionals to have a conversation about health and safety. So we hope to directly address the concerns that residents have about migrant worker communities like moving in and potentially, increasing the rate of infection in a community. Hopefully having healthcare professionals kind of lend their weight and their voice on this conference would help dissuade or persuade residents to be less worried. Yeah, so
Right.
that's something that
And Ethel, what challenges do you foresee? Because earlier on you mentioned about some of the things that you wanted to debunk, and what are the most prevalent narratives about foreign workers that you're hoping to debunk?
Right. So one of the primary concerns that Fabian did mention to me is the fact that residents think migrant workers are free to roam around the neighborhood without being kind of essentially limited in their interactions, and they are going around kind of transmitting the virus, which is not true. Migrant workers are unfortunately very much kind of limited in their physical mobility right now. They can only go out of the compound for their work purposes, and they are immediately ferried to and fro using transport vehicles. So that's actually not the case. Like they're not kind of being like a spreader in the community. We also like to debunk the myth that foreign workers are in this position because they do not, practice good hygiene or good sanitation, and it's simply not the case. And we hope that residents can be a bit more empathetic and compassionate towards them during this period of time. And yeah, I think we would like to focus on common experiences that we all have during this period of time, pushing them towards like a feeling of abundance and wanting to help spread this community like welcoming spirit and help uplift other members of the community, which our migrant workers are a part of.
Right, absolutely. Well, like you mentioned, we are living in a very extraordinary time. We have common experiences within this period. But do you think this campaign will have lasting effects beyond the circuit breaker when our foreign workers go back to living in the dorms?
So I think this is a very interesting question because perhaps something that we could question ourselves is why do they have to go back to living in their dorms? If this is potentially a way of showing that residents can be welcoming to migrant workers living amongst us in our residential neighborhoods, it could be a way of reframing the entire way we view our interactions with them. And maybe it's a bold movement to show that living together, local or foreign, is possible. This is a movement that we hope will stay and not just a campaign of the month of the circuit breaker. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's a fantastic way to end this. Thank you very much for your time, Ethel.
Thank you very much for having me.
That was Ethel Pang, an ambassador for Welcome in My Backyard, which is a campaign to encourage Singaporeans to be more welcoming to migrant workers relocating to housing estates.
Singapore has almost 1.4 million people loosely described as foreign workers. These are largely S pass holders, work permit holders, employment pass holders, and domestic helpers. And in all, they form 25% of the resident population. They work in virtually every industry, just to name a few: building and construction, transport, F&B, retail, health, and elder care.
In a piece today, Associate Editor at the Straits Times, Ven Sreenivasan, wrote that it's time to rethink Singapore's over-reliance on foreign workers. This, as the epicenter of the virus spread here, has moved from the local populace to the migrant worker community. So let's get Ven in on this discussion. So Ven, to reduce our overdependence on foreign workers, you wrote that Singaporeans must be more open-minded to the nobility of work, any work. Blue-collar jobs must also be respected. But some background first. The idea that blue-collar jobs isn't noble, so to speak, how and when did that come about in Singapore, Ven?
Well, to begin with, it wasn't always that way. I mean, You go back to the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, the formative years of Singapore. All work was noble. I mean, our fathers, our grandfathers, our great-grandfathers, wherever they came from, whether it's in the Southeast Asian archipelago, China, India, they worked very hard. They were all blue-collar workers. Most of them were. But by the late 80s, late 1980s, we transitioned to becoming a developed nation. And you know, increasing education, affluence, changes in mindsets, came into play. That's when the younger generation, people started seeking white-collar jobs, preferably in the fast-growing financial sector, the services sector, the Shenton Way type of jobs. Job hopping became common. So, that's when the transition happened, and then fast forward to today. Most young people will not work on anything that is menial, sweaty, dirty, dangerous. I mean, you cannot get too many people to go out to work in Tuas, in any of the factories. Even as a supervisor, much less as a technical person. That's where we are today.
And then how far are we in changing this mindset in Singapore? Now, we understand blue-collar work is viewed quite differently in the US, Australia, and even in Europe.
How far are we? Well, not very far, I'm afraid. Partly also due to the fact that blue-collar jobs, or as they are called, don't pay all that much in Singapore. It's quite different in developed Western countries. Western, I mean, even Australia, New Zealand. For example, you go to Australia, a technician, a plumber, a mechanic is highly valued and well paid. And in fact, some of these guys are better paid than a lot of white-collar people like teachers and civil servants, mid-level white-collar. So, even in Australia, for example, immigration policy favors blue collars. So, I mean, if I was a plumber and if I applied to go work in Australia, I'd have a better chance than going in as a teacher or a journalist. So that's where we are now.
Well, then, you posed this question in the article: can jobs in sectors like retail, F&B, transport, and selected others be redesigned to make them more palatable for residents? Can they, Ven? And if so, what needs to be done?
It's not going to be an easy solution in a sense that you know, I'll- you know, I mean, let's just take F&B for example. We we have lots and lots of restaurants. We have lots and lots of people working in these places, and many of these people are not Singaporean. How do you redesign the restaurants? How do you make one with four tables like you find in Paris or London or New York? Technology, maybe some job redesign. You got to improve productivity. You got to increase incentives for locals to come in. I don't know. I mean, should we bring back tipping? Take away the service charge? Would that draw in more people, more locals, because they'll take home higher salary and tip? I mean, this calls for a lot of discussion. Pay is a big factor in Singapore, where cost of living is quite high, and but the mindset also has to change among Singaporeans. Waiting on somebody or serving somebody is not a menial task. It's not a low-level job. It's not a job that does not deserve respect. So there needs to be a mindset change.
Right. Then on that note, then will Singapore be better or worse off if we employed fewer foreign workers?
If we employ fewer foreign workers, it depends. I mean, if we are talking about construction, manufacturing, essential services, offshore and marine, we will need foreign workers. We just don't have the workforce. So if we don't get them, we will be worse off. But I believe in other areas, for example, in transport, in logistics, in F&B, in retail, we can do with most Singaporeans. I don't want to say less foreigners. But Singaporean with better salaries, better incentives, to redesign the job, make it more attractive.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Ven. We've been speaking to Associate Editor for the Straits Times, Ven Sreenivasan. If you're watching us on YouTube, the link to his commentary is in the description below.
Well, the discussions surrounding COVID-19 and the circuit breaker continue as our senior health correspondent Salma Khalik helms yet another exclusive panel discussion. Join her and a host of top infectious diseases experts as they discuss how new information about the pandemic is guiding Singapore's response, as well as a rise in dormitory cases. That is at 5:30 p.m. this Wednesday, April 22nd, so do not miss it.
On the global front, in Malaysia, the Malaysian Employers Federation urged the government to do more to track cases of infection among illegal foreign workers, an area that they feel could prove problematic in the fight against the pandemic. While the Federation noted that the spread among documented foreign workers has been well managed, it believes that the spread between illegal ones are much harder to track and control, as they often live in cramped spaces. Many are also not covered by any medical insurance. MEF said that there could be up to 3.3 million illegal workers in the country.
Over in the UK, officials admitted that Prime Minister Boris Johnson missed 5 key COBRA emergency meetings in the early stages of the pandemic. COBRA refers to a cross-departmental group convened in situations of national emergency. This comes as the government faces criticism that the UK missed several opportunities to get on the front foot in late January and February.
The fight against the coronavirus continues in mainland China as it reported 12 new cases yesterday. Of the total, 8 were imported. There were 49 new asymptomatic cases compared to 44 a day earlier.
And over the weekend, US President Donald Trump warned that China should face consequences if it was knowingly responsible for the coronavirus pandemic. To discuss these souring relations between the world's two largest economies, we're joined by Kishore Mahbubani, Distinguished Fellow at Asia Research Institute at the National University of Singapore. Hi, Prof. Now, Prof, how seriously should China take President Trump's threat?
Well, if this were normal times, I would tell China, please don't worry. This is an election year. In every US presidential election year, China gets best. For example, as far back as 1992, when President Bill Clinton was running against George H.W. Bush, he said very famously, he said, unlike President Bush, Bill Clinton, I will not coddle the butchers of Beijing. But that's a very strong term to use, butchers of Beijing. But I was personally present at Lake Island a year later when there was a very happy meeting between Bill Clinton and the leader of China, Jiang Zemin, in 1993. But since then, the world has changed dramatically. China has come back. A major geopolitical contest has broken out between US and China, which, as you can see from my book, Has China Won? I have documented at great detail. So we are just at the beginning of a major geopolitical struggle between the United States and China. So if I had to give advice to China, I would say, be careful. Dangerous times are coming, as I say in my book.
Well, this blame game that Mr. Trump seems to be playing, blaming China as well as the World Health Organization, what kind of precedent would that set, do you think?
Well, I think it's very dangerous. And as you know, I wrote an article for the Straits Times pointing out that the World Health Organization is weak today not because of what's been done in the last year or two, is being weakened for several decades by a dedicated Western campaign to reduce the mandatory contributions from 62% to 18%. And so right now, frankly, the world needs to come together, especially the US and China, together with the World Health Organization, to deal with this incredibly dangerous threat posed by COVID-19. So this blame game is extremely dangerous, and we should try to do our best to counsel the key countries and say, please stop this.
Now, Prof, could we see a reckoning between Washington and Beijing? And are we heading towards another Cold War?
Well, I mean, it is, of course, very easy to use the word Cold War because people understand it. We had a big fight between the United States and Soviet Union. But it's important to understand, as a student of geopolitics, that every major contest in some ways is very different. So what we're going to see happening between the United States and China, as I document in my book, The China Born, is not a repetition of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union actually, as a country, was much younger than the United States of America, right? It only was formed in the 20th century. By contrast, China is a 4,000-year-old civilization with its own political culture, its own political dynamic. And I think one of my key arguments is that the United States is making a huge strategic mistake by launching into this great geopolitical contest against China without first working out a comprehensive long-term strategy. And it was Henry Kissinger who shared this insight with me. So what we're going to see, therefore, is a major struggle over the next 10 to 20 years. And I would urge my fellow Singaporeans to be psychologically prepared for this great struggle, because it is also going to affect Singapore.
Right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. It was a pleasure speaking with you, Prof. That was Kishore Mahbubani, Distinguished Fellow at the Asia Research Institute at NUS.
Stay-at-home Singapore has proven to be quite the hit. It has raised over $94,000 for low-income families affected by the outbreak, less than a week since it was released on April 11.
A new version of the video was released last Friday, this time involving 8 young singers in the ensemble. The Stay-at-Home Singapore campaign was launched to not only drive home the importance of safe distancing, but also to help those affected by the outbreak due to job losses or pay cuts.
Now, joining us today is singer-songwriter Clement Chow, the man behind the original Count on Me Singapore classic, as well as both versions of Stay at Home Singapore. Clement, why do you decide to have a second version, a remake of the remake, of Stay at Home Singapore?
Okay. Well, it was actually more together with the Straits Times team. They mooted the idea. But I really wanted to follow through with that because it was more inclusive, first of all, and we have kids, and to also have the hearing impact, and to also further the efforts that have seen so many positive reactions and so much action as well.
The first version raised $94,000. That's a fantastic effort. What would you like to say to those who have generously donated to the campaign, Clement?
I just want to say we are all deeply touched and grateful. It just goes to show that no Singaporean is useless. Right here when you can help lighten the burden of another person or another family. So thank you so much.
Well, we thank you, Clement. That was singer-songwriter Clement Chow, who now put together 2 remakes of his classic National Day song, Count on Me Singapore, to raise funds for low-income families affected by the COVID-19 crisis.
Your donations will go to support the ST School Pocket Money Fund and the Business Times Budding Artists Fund. Go to the link below to donate. It's also in the description if you are watching us on YouTube. This is The Big Story. Stay safe, everyone.